texting screen right now. I watched it.
Of course it was.
I'm like, okay, yes, I'm presenting here.
Okay, you can start.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Tonight, we are going to talk about supporting your transitional kindergarten or kindergarten reader. We have Mrs. Kitzman here with us. She teaches KE. Frau Holt is here from KF, but she just stepped out for a moment. And my name is Sean Powell. I'm one of the literacy specialists here at AEA. This year, oh yes, here we are. Thank you. This year I am focusing mostly on TK through third. That was the plan. I've ended up also seeing some fourth grade, fifth graders this year too. The other literacy specialists and I are just sort of helping each other get everything covered as best we can. So it's kind of turned out that we're still doing everybody's. Thank you. Tonight, what we're hoping to describe for you guys is what are the components of learning to read. So giving you some information so that you know kind of the stages and the things that your children will pass through as they become proficient readers. We're going to describe phonological awareness and phonics so that you know what both those words mean and how it applies to your child. We'll talk about developmental readiness and what that also means. And then we'll share some strategies for supporting your child at home if you want to do some extra work for them at home. So here are some big ideas that we hope that you leave our training with. Number one is talk with your child. This is something that is so important. And when we talk about kids learning how to read, we don't always think about the language piece of that and how much communicating with them is really important. And just letting them hear words, talking with them about day-to-day things, increasing their oral vocabulary by just talking with you and pointing things out. So that's something that is actually it really contributes strongly to them becoming a reader. So that's a way that you can support your child becoming a reader. Reading to your child to build knowledge. So reading to your child is something that generally most kids love. They get to spend time with their family. They get to read or hear a story that they're really engaged with. So it kind of fosters a love of reading and enjoyment of reading and of stories. It gives families time, special time together, and it kind of builds that association between love and reading and making it that kind of a beneficial experience for kids. It also helps them build their background knowledge. So it helps them learn about the world. And all of that is really important to them as they are learners and moving through elementary school. All these things that they pick up on and that they learn contribute to them as learners and students at school. So the more exposure they get to those things as early as possible, the better for them. Number three is notice everything. I have noticed that your children are very curious and want to know everything there is to know about the world. Probably ask you a ton of questions. So that's actually something we want to encourage in them, especially here at our school. We encourage them being inquirers and asking questions and having wonderings and learning all the things that are interesting to them. And the last one is just make it fun. And I think that's something our teachers do a really good job with here, trying to make learning fun. Make it enjoyable. Don't make it seem like a chore or a task, but almost so that they're learning and they don't even know. Right? So let me tell you a little bit about literacy here at our school. We have a pretty unique model. We are a dual language immersion program. So as you know, we have classes, 50% of your students' time is spent in the German classroom and 50% is spent in the English classroom. So they're learning content in both languages. What that means, so for our teachers and for our students, is that they only have 50% of the time to learn the English language standards that they would if they were going to a school that wasn't. So that's a lot of pressure on teachers to try and fit everything in that they need to fit in half the amount of time. And it can be challenging for our kids too who are learning this because they may be learning two languages. They may be learning a new language in German or English, or they may be learning two new languages. So they've got a lot going on. So that does impact how they progress through as readers and writers in our program. What we have seen anecdotally and through our state test scores is that even though some of our students lag behind a little bit, second and third grade, maybe even a little bit in fourth, by the end of fifth grade, most of our students have caught up to where they're English only school peers have been in terms of literacy. But it is something to be aware of. We meet with families all the time who are worried about their child's progress. They're comparing their child to their neighbor's children, and what their neighbor's children is reading Harry Potter. Why isn't my kid reading Harry Potter? We always like to remind them, like, it may be a little slower because they're becoming biliterate. They're learning in English and German to read and write. So it does slow them down a little bit. We do use at our school evidence-based curricula to teach reading and writing. So what that means is it's based on research that was done, whether the methods and the scope and sequence of that curricula is effective for teaching reading to children. So the ones that we primarily use SIPS, which stands for Systematic Instruction and Phonological Awareness, phonics, sight words. And that's taught in K1 and 3. Our second grade team has chosen a different curriculum. It's still also evidence-based, but it is just a different curriculum that they use. It also still follows a scope and sequence of phonics learning, so the kids make sure they learn all of the sounds that they need to know so that they can sound out any word that they come across. Also in grades K through 3, we use a German curricula called ABC der Tiere. Did I say that? I don't speak German, but I try. And that is, focusing on the German phonics, the German sound system, the code for German. So that is the curriculum that we use for German. Anything you want to add to that? Okay, thank you, Leslie. So this is a quick video. Hopefully the speakers, I forgot to tell you.
What do we know about the complex process of learning to read? Surprisingly, a lot. Scientific research collected over the past 4 decades reveals what happens in the brain and what must happen in the classroom to enable skillful reading. Most children learn to walk and talk naturally without a lot of support from adults, but reading is different. Reading is not hardwired in the brain, and the neural pathways involved must be developed through successful instructional experiences. Let's look at the reading brain. The parts of the brain that allow us to process sounds and recognize visual images are already in place at birth in the left hemisphere. However, the phonological assembly region is not intact at birth. This is the part of the brain that allows us to connect speech sounds with visual images, such as letters, and enables reading. And it must be built through explicit, systematic phonics instruction and practice with decoding.
Just like the takeaway from that is just that learning to read is not a natural process. Reading is something that evolution, oh my gosh. It's recent in terms of evolution, okay? I don't even know what I was trying to say. It's only been around for, I think, about 10,000 years or so. So for human evolution, that's a very short amount of time. So our brains haven't evolved yet to have these neural pathways already there when kids are born. So we have to build them. So even though it seems like some kids learn to read very easily and other kids really struggle with it, they're all having to build these neural pathways. So it isn't something that is just natural for them. We have to give them the tools and the instruction that they need so we can stimulate that to happen in their brain. So here are the components of learning to read. Back in, I'm not going to remember the year, I want to say 2000, the government put together something called the National Reading Panel. And what this panel did was they reviewed all of the research that had been done in the last 20 years on reading. And what they drew from that was there are 5 main parts of becoming an experienced and a skilled reader. So the parts are listed at the bottom, and I'm going to go over each one so you know what those are. But I also want to emphasize that there really isn't necessarily an order. A lot of these things happen at the same time. There's some back and forth. So even though they're presented in an order, sometimes they don't always happen. So can you go to the next one? I'm going to go through each one of them. So the first one is called phonemic awareness. And this is the ability to identify the sounds that make up speech. So if I asked you, what is the first sound in cat? You would be able to tell me it's k. So you're able to hear those sounds, identify where they're happening in a word. First sound, the middle sound, the ending sound. That's called phonemic awareness. A phoneme is another word for sound. When you hear people talking about learning the sounds and sounding out words, we're all talking a lot about phonemic awareness, and that's a really important piece that kids need to have to learn to read.
And this also goes into, for sound spelling, you might see your kids come home with really weird spelled words. For example, right behind Sean, you'll see how we say, he is silly. This makes sense because they're sounding out each part of the word. So just in case you see that, they really in first and second grade is when spelling happens. We're not going to teach them the rule because there's so many rules in English. So right now we're just doing that. So if you see that coming home, it is to be expected.
Yeah, that's a normal progression for kids too. It's called phonetic spelling. So they hear a sound and they write the letter that they know of so far that makes that sound. When they're in TK and kindergarten, they're just learning the sounds that go with each letter. So they may not know all of those spelling rules that they're going to continue to learn through second and third, all the way through second and third grade. So that's fine. And as long as if we can sound it out, we can tell that they meant silly, even though they wrote an E at the end, because they heard E and they're like, oh, I know the letter E, I can write it, The next part is called phonics. So this is where they match the sound to a symbol, in this case, a letter. So they can look at a shape. You think about the shape of the letter A, it's got the pointy top and the cross across it. And they can look at that and associate the sound "a" with that. So that phonics is matching the sound with the letter so that they can read and spell using those sounds that go with the letters. So once they can do that, once they know the code, the phonics code that goes with it, then they can read fluently. And that just means reading smoothly. It means reading at a pace that allows their brain to understand what they're reading, which is the ultimate goal of why we as humans read. We want to understand what we're reading. So once they are proficient with phonics, we start measuring their fluency, accuracy. So this does not happen in kindergarten unless we have a really high reader. And sometimes we do have readers in kindergarten that are already reading proficiently. But for the most part, most kids are really working on learning the letters and the sounds. That's kind of where they are in kindergarten. So vocabulary, I love this. Vocabulary is the key to knowing more about everything. So it's just all those words, and that's what I want to go back to, talking with your kid, reading to your kid. That's where they're hearing a lot of these words maybe they've never heard before, and where you guys might have conversations about, well, what is that? What does that mean? You're building that knowledge that they are storing away in their brain that's going to help them make sense of the things that they're learning at school and just the things that they encounter in their lives as well. So vocabulary is really important. And we are working on vocabulary in kindergarten in all of our grades because the way it impacts them as they learn to read is the more oral vocabulary they have. So when they understand, like if you're saying a word to them, they've heard it before, it really helps them when they're learning to read and they're trying to sound out words. So they're saying the sounds at, oh, cat, I've heard that before. It's really hard to recognize a word if you haven't been exposed to it before. Then you're just saying sounds and you might be like, well, I'm saying the sounds, but I don't really know if it's a word. So the more oral language they have access to, it really helps them to become a better reader. And then this is the ultimate goal of reading, is comprehension. Being able to understand what they read, being able to think about it, analyze it, talk about it, write about it. That is what we're headed for. That's the ultimate goal. And that can happen in kindergarten. A lot of times the way that happens isn't through a child reading the book themselves if they aren't ready yet, but listening to a story like Mrs. Hitzman read Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch. Listening to the story, and it starts out with listening comprehension, understanding what the story is about because you listen to it. And that's also something practiced at home when you read to your child too. You can talk about the story and who the characters are, what the setting is. So this is a relatively new graphic to talk about reading. And what it shows is how complex being a skilled reader really is. And so when you kind of see all this, you're like, wow, so much goes into it. And a lot of times we don't really realize how tough it can be. And if there's a breakdown in one of these strands, then it can really impact a child's ability to learn how to read well. So the top part, the blue strands, is all language comprehension. So there's background knowledge. So this is all the things they know in their head that they've learned so far, with their age. There's vocabulary, so knowing what words mean. Language structure, so that's like knowing what a sentence is, knowing that words make up a sentence. There's verbal reasoning, so being able to inference and make deductions based on information. And there's literacy knowledge, so this is like understanding that we read from left to right, understanding where the front of the book is, the back of the book, understanding different genres as they get older, fiction and informational and all of those things. So those are all the blue strands. The green strands are word recognition. So this is really, the nitty gritty of what we're working on in kindergarten, is we're really working on the phonological awareness so that they can recognize by sound what syllables are. They can say their name, like Frau Holt, Frau Holt. Really good example. Erin, we'll use her first name, Erin, 2 syllables. So they can start hearing those things. They don't have to be able to read her name, but they can hear it and break it apart into different parts, right? And then the phonemes that we were talking about, thinking about the individual sounds in each word. Decoding is basically sounding out words, being able to see the letters, say the sound that goes along with the letter, and then blend it all together to make the word. And then sight recognition of familiar words. So if you're an adult, you probably have a huge sight word repertoire in your brain. You're not sounding out very many words anymore. Maybe every once in a while you'll come across it and you might have to use some of those skills to sound it out. For the most part, if you've been reading your whole life, you just recognize words that are just a sight word. You've seen it before, you know it is. That's kind of where people end up, and that's why you become a skilled and proficient reader. So all of those things weave together to make a skilled reader. So as teachers, sometimes we are doing detective work to figure out where there's a breakdown if a child is having a hard time. Any questions so far? So we'll start talking a little bit about phonological awareness. So this is just the ability to recognize and manipulate spoken parts of sentences and of words. So we start off, pretty basic, and we might say, here's a sentence. The cat is black. How many words are there? The cat is black. 4 words. And this is all done auditorily. They're not even looking at anything. It's just, can they differentiate from the spoken? So, and then I'm sorry.
No.
I know,
You're
this is what, and so it kind of builds. There's different levels of this. So one of the easier, the less complex ones is just rhyming. So, being silly, the Cat in the Hat books, Dr. Seuss, those kinds of things where they can play around with language and recognize rhyming words. Alliteration is just where you have the same sound repeated. So like a tongue twister, like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, would be alliteration with the sound at the beginning of every word. Then it gets a little bit more complex with sentence segmentation. And that's what I just gave an example of. Say the sentence, say how many words are there in the sentence, so they can kind of identify auditorily the words. Then syllables, so breaking words into their parts, syllables. And then consonants and rhymes, that just means like it's the first sound in the word and then the rest of the word. So for cat, it would be the onset, and at would be the rhyme. So being able to recognize those 2. And then the very most complex one is the phonemic awareness. That's being able to think about and identify at the individual sound level. What's the first sound? What's the last sound? What's the middle sound? Let's see. So these skills develop in a predictable pattern. And we do have in the handouts that you have, there's a handout in there that kind of tells you about the age when most kids master different levels of phonological awareness skills, for the most part. I think it says on there, it's like 80% of 6-year-olds have mastered this by the time they're 6. So you can kind of see and judge. The other thing that's interesting is it's the same no matter what language you may be speaking with your child. So these skills can develop in any language. They're still learning the same skills. Doesn't matter, English, German, Spanish, Russian, anything. They're still developing these skills through hearing the sounds of that language. Thank you. So going to phonemic awareness now. So this is the most complex type of phonological awareness. And this is just being able to think about the sounds. So for kiddos, when they start spelling, we're just saying, okay, spell the word cat. They have to think about, okay, what's the first sound I hear? What letter makes that sound? And then you gotta write that. So they have to be able to break words apart like that so that they can spell them by listening to what sound. And that's a skill that is developing in kindergarten, would you say? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think they're expected to be proficient in that until end of kindergarten, beginning of first grade. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about phonics. Welcome, hola. So phonics it has a bunch of different names, but it is called the alphabetic code, and each language has its own code. So at our school, the kids are learning the code for English and the code for German, and they have to know those two different codes to be able to read in both languages. It teaches the relationships between the letters and the written language and the sound. So this is a chart that we use. This has all of the letters of the alphabet. The letters that have the yellow box around the outside, those sounds are the same in both English and German. So when our kids are learning sounds, they're learning, I think there's 14 of them. 14 of them are the same in English and German. So they don't have to worry about different sounds. The ones that are white, that don't have the yellow outline, those are different between English and German. So these also show kind of the motions, and you may be familiar with the kids are learning the letter sounds and they do a motion along with it, like A says ah, right? So these give like a little visual of those motions too. So we found that when we give them an action to do that moves their body, it helps their brain remember the sound and the letter association better. So we have the same motions. For the ones that are the same in English and German, the motion is the same. They're different. There's a different motion that goes with the sounds for them, English and German. So this is what the German phonics code looks like. So they've got different motions. The same motions for the letters that make the same sounds, and then they're different from the others. And then we have those hand movements. So at our school, we're teaching kids both codes, the English code and the German code, because we want them to be literate in both. We may also have students who are learning to read in other languages too, that are their home language, and so they may be learning a third code, fourth code, and they've got to have all of those in order to write. Talk about that. So we're trying something different in kindergarten this year that we haven't done before. This is our beta year to try this out. What we found is that the vowel sounds, because they are different between English and German, they are the hardest part for our students to really get solid on, because there's different sounds. So in the past, we've taught the German vowel sounds and the English vowel sounds concurrently in kindergarten. But what we found was a lot of our kids, when they go into first grade, they still aren't solid in either one. Like they're still mixing up those vowel sounds a lot, which makes it really hard for them to read in either language, because the vowels are in every single word. So what we're trying this year is kindergarten is focusing only on the English letter sounds, so English vowel sounds in kindergarten. Once our students are proficient and have a strong foundation of those, then we're adding in the German vowel sounds. So we're trying to get that mastery first before we add in and say, oh yeah, by the way, this letter makes a different sound in German. So the way we're kind of doing it is, if they have mastered it already in kindergarten, then the German teachers will introduce the German vowel sounds. But otherwise, if they haven't mastered it yet, that will be introduced in first grade. So that's kind of what we're trying to see, if we build a stronger foundation, if it helps them become better readers more quickly. We know from research that the foundation that they have in one language transfers to another language. So that's what we're capitalizing on here to see if that will work for us.
What we're finding is in Frau's class and all the German teacher classes, the kids get exposure to these letter sounds, not even just vowel sounds, but also letter sounds in German and in English. And we're finding that our kids are just making much more progress in the English language. Doesn't mean that they're not learning vocab and whatnot in German, but it's just really nice to have that consistency first, at such a young age, I think it's really important to be consistent with kids, and I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I kind of solved that problem too that we were seeing where we only had half the time to teach them and get them to mastery. But this year, they're getting kind of doubled up on learning those sounds that they need. And the reason this idea kind of came about was our first grade teachers had noticed that when we would get new students to our school that had not been here in kindergarten, and they joined us in first grade, that they were able to get caught up really quickly on the German sounds because they already had a strong foundation in the English sounds. So we were like, how can we use that knowledge to help us with all of our students? So that's what led to us trying this, to do it a little differently this year. So we shall see. All right, so let's talk about developmental readiness. So this is a big conversation in kindergarten and TK. You can't speed it up. Kids are ready when they're ready. And that is sometimes hard because our educational system says that kindergartners must be doing certain skills by the time they leave kindergarten. Not every kindergarten student is ready to master those skills yet. And we can't rush them. There's nothing we can do to speed it up. When they're developmentally ready, then they are ready for it. So there's a range. They learn to read and write and spell when they're ready. Some are ready early, some are not ready early. So that is a challenge that all of our kindergarten teachers face. They have a broad variety of kids at different levels of readiness in their classroom, and they have to be teaching all of this content to them and figuring out how to make it work for the kids that may not be so ready for it yet, and how to still challenge the kids that are ready for it and want more. So this is and there's usually a very broad range, I think, for you guys at every classroom.
There's a really broad range, and I know you probably covered this in your conferences with your teachers. I know we covered it with you, but we do small group reading. So all of our kids are put into groups that are with their peers that are right at their level too. So I think having the kids be surrounded by people that are right there with them, that helps them build confidence. And so it's really nice having those smaller groups because then we can kind of pick and choose what the kids are going to learn, all based off of that 6 reading program that Mrs. Paul.
And if you're concerned about where your child is at and the pace that they're learning at, it's a really good idea just to talk to their teacher, because our teachers have been working with this age group for a long time, and they can say, yeah, I just don't see that the child's really quite developmentally ready yet. It'll come, don't worry, we're just going to keep presenting it, making it available. So they can kind of guide you too, because they have been working with this age group for a long time. And so they kind of know by working with them where they may be at, and if we need to just give a little bit of extra time and not to panic. In the handouts that I gave everyone, Monica, can you give her a handout? Thank you. There is some in Spanish, not every single thing in Spanish, but a lot of it is English and Spanish too. There are some milestones that are in here that just kind of talk about the basic, where we want kids to be at. And I'm not going to read through all of them because there's quite a few, but you can just kind of, this might help you be able to judge where your child is at. Like, are they getting close? Likes to listen to stories and talk about books. Makes attempts to read. Right? Are they pretending? Or how they want to pretend to read, so they'll just kind of tell the story along with the pictures, even though they may not be able to read the words yet. Do they know 10 or more of the letters? Do they know the names of the letters? Right? So they're starting to pay attention, tune into those things. Has fun with language, likes to listen to poetry, plays games, likes rhyming books. The Cat in the Hat books. So those kinds of books are entertaining for them. Let's see, can answer why questions, so they can kind of think about things and analyze. There's also another handout in here that's reading skills at different ages. It's like this. It just talks about where babies are at, and toddlers and preschoolers. You can kind of get an idea. Typically, this is kind of where kids are at these different ages. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I wanted to provide them in case they're helpful to kind of gauge where your child's at now and maybe where they might be heading in the future to kind of see where they're if there are anything, if any of these in here, because I tried to find Spanish ones for all of them, but I know I didn't find all of them. So if there's ones in here that you really want and I didn't give you a Spanish one, let me know at the end of the night, or let one of your teachers know, and I will work really hard to try and get the Spanish one for you. Thank you, Liz. So this is something, this is a guy, what's this guy's name? Jack Hartman. I know Miss E in our TK classroom watches Jack Hartman videos all the time. He makes a whole bunch of different videos. But the reason that this one is kind of cool, this idea is kind of cool, is for kids that are trying to get ready to read. There are some physical activities that actually help their brains get ready to do it. Because when we read, we have to start at the left-hand side of the text and read to the right. So our eyes are going to start over here, and then they're crossing over here. So this part of our body is called the midline. Like right down our nose, we split our bodies in half, we've got our midline. For kids to be successful with that crossing the midline activity of reading, that can be really hard sometimes. The coordination, the muscle work, all of the things they need to know, they're not always ready for that yet either. So they can actually do other things in their body to cross the midline, like just doing activities where their arms and legs are crossing the midline. And that helps them build the connections in their brains to get ready for that crossing the midline. So in really extreme examples, you can see kids who will start writing here and then put the pencil in their other hand when they get to the midline and start and finish writing here because they just have not mastered that crossing piece. So I'm going to have Mrs. Kitzman play this video just for a few seconds, not too long, to kind of see, but he shows some activities and exercises that kids can do to help them with this crossing the midline idea. Thank you, Mrs.
Every day, cross over,
He goes on and on. And he also has a lot of really fun videos for letter names and sounds and things too, if you want to look them up on YouTube.
Have your kids said anything about watching Jack?
Do you guys watch this one?
At the beginning of the year, for sure, but there's other ones like really good syllable clap outs and,
He has a whole
the
bunch
vowel
of
one.
content that's kind of fun. Kind of cheesy, but kind of fun.
It's surprising how much they like watching. How much? And with that said, it's not like we're letting him teach ourselves, but just that way.
It's kind of nice sometimes to have to turn it over to someone else for a few minutes. So here are some other things that you can do to kind of help build those connections in their brain. So synchronized speaking, clapping, and walking. So just kind of stomping around your house and clapping and talking at the same time. If you have like poetry or anything with rhythm, having them recite something and move their bodies at the same time, clap along with the rhythm. All of these things are really helpful. Speaking while throwing balls. This was a new one for me. I didn't know about this. Our first grade team told me this one. So if they have, and they don't have to throw a ball, but throwing something, being able to speak while they do that is actually pretty challenging for some kids who aren't developmentally ready for that. So practicing that can be really helpful for them. Catching a ball, rope jumping, standing on one leg, drawing with two hands, drawing with music. So all of these different things that you might not think of would help support them as readers are actually really good for kids that are still going through those developmental stages and helping them build those connections for crossing that midline of their body. Okay, so early intervention. So at our school, we're working really hard to develop systems so that all of our students, if they aren't making progress the way that we expect them to, are getting early intervention. Because we know that the research shows that when we give them intervention early and help them with the things that they're struggling to learn, that the outcomes are significantly better. If we wait until after first grade to support students who are struggling readers, the outcomes are significantly worse. It's really hard to get them to catch up. So what we're trying to work on at our school right now is developing systems where we're assessing every student regularly. I work with our grade level teams to identify students that we're concerned about. We figure out, okay, how are we going to support them? I think if you go to the next slide. So this is kind of how we provide intervention. So Mrs. Kisman referenced in classrooms, the teachers are working in small groups. So the kids are getting instruction at the level they're at right then, and they're in a group that is kind of at the same level. And it's a small group, and small group instruction is generally more effective than teaching the whole class because you can give feedback more easily to a smaller group of kids. You can also kind of see getting it, are they not getting it? You can adjust right away. So it's helpful to really target instruction. I also see groups along with our kindergarten aide, Miss Nancy. So we pull groups of kids out into our learning center area. And so we'll work with them several times a week, doing also really targeted instruction, hoping to double up on the information that they're getting. So they're still getting their small groups in the classroom and they're getting extra help in the learning center as well. We have some before school reading groups that we just started this year. And I'm trying really hard to set up after school reading groups as well. We're not quite there yet, but I think it's coming. So hopefully that's something we can offer to families as well. It's always been challenging at school when we have to pull kids out of their classroom to give them extra help and they miss instruction that's happening in the classroom. So we're really trying to build a system where we can do more of our support before and after school so they don't miss something. And then we really just try and monitor everything with assessment so we can always see if they're making progress or not making progress. Do we need to change what we're doing? So we're trying to, get more consistent with collecting that data and using that data. If you were here early, you heard us talking about our data analysis, and we're really looking at the whole kindergarten grade level to see where we're at and what we need to do, and we need to support things differently.
And I want to say too, it's not just for our kids who need intervention as well. And maybe you're going to get into this too, but we do have an English aide. Her name is Miss Nancy, and she pulls out our kids that we're seeing who have exceptional reading skills already. So, and she also pulls out our kids that are just trekking right along, so they get extra support too. But so both sides, are really our kids that are struggling very much, and then our kids that are very, very high. They're both getting touches. And the ones that are cruising are really taking our small group instruction. They're taking it in.
Thank you for pointing that out. I tend to focus on the students that are struggling because those are usually the students that I'm working with, but that is true. We're doing the teams are doing a really good job of making sure that even our high readers are being challenged, still getting instruction to keep them moving along at their level. So we always try to do this with all of our kids, like meet them where they're at and keep them going further. So a lot of the questions that we get from families are, how can I support my child? So we'll give you some ideas. This is my favorite. And now there's research to back it. Reading aloud to your children is the single most effective parent practice for enhancing language and literacy development. It doesn't matter what language you're reading in. It does not matter. You're just doing it. They're hearing the language. They're interacting with you. They're building a love of reading. This is huge. So sometimes families feel like they need to be doing flashcards. They need to be doing drill. Read to your children. Talk with your children. Those things can't be overstated, the importance of those things. And they're usually really enjoyable for you to do with your children too. So that's a good thing. I just said this too, talk. So increasing your child's vocabulary, increasing their knowledge of the world. Again, it doesn't matter what language you're doing this in, they're building their understanding of everything around them. That's only going to help them as a learner.
We also stress at the beginning of the year too, because your kids might say my favorite part of the day is recess. But asking them open-ended questions like, how was your small group, today with Mrs. Kitzman? Or did you do small groups? I mean, that's open-ended, but just trying to think of ways that they can answer yes or no to the question might help you get more out of them if you're having some trouble, because this is also normal. If your kids don't want to necessarily share everything.
So we talked a little bit already about alliteration. This is kind of a fun thing that you can do at home. You can check out books from the library or buy books that have alliteration. There's some recommendations in here, like Some Smug Slug by Pamela Duncan. In this presentation will be available on our website. I don't know, maybe a week or so. I don't know how long it takes to get up there, but it'll be up there. And there's links in here too of other places you can click on. But YouTube, you can just go to YouTube also and type in alliteration or songs for kids, and there's a bazillion, right, of fun ones. TheMeasuredMom.com is a really great website that has also a ton of great ideas and activities for kids.
Send out this exact slideshow.
Yeah, we can send it out
In
too.
addition, yeah,
100%.
we can send it directly.
Yeah, that's a
These
good
are
idea.
really, the links go right. But
Thank
still take a photo.
No, that's a good idea. Thank you. That would be great. So we talked a little bit about syllable clapping too. So this can be fun. Like you can do this when you're driving in the car. You don't have to you sit at the table and do all this. It can just be like walking somewhere or whatever. You can say silly words like the thing that I like to do with the kids, the little ones especially, is we talk about syllables and we do everybody's name. We go around the table, we clap their name, and it's really fun. And then I'm like, okay, we're gonna do supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. What? So it's just fun because you just have fun. The thing is, make it fun and they latch onto it. That they're learning without really realizing that they're learning. So it's just finding a word like apple. Apple. 2 syllables in that word. It's as simple as that. Any word you want to do. Like you can say, how many syllables does chair have? The hard part for the kids that are just learning this is 1 syllable words because they always want to have word class. So they'll say chair, and they're like, no, that was only 1. It's just chair. That's the part that they get hung up on because they want to do something.
And this one can be done in multiple languages too. Like
Oh,
in Spanish,
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's simple to do it in other languages too.
Yeah, any language doesn't even matter. You can even do made up words, right? They don't even have to be real words. You talk.
We do all the time like names. So because part of our 6 reading group, we do that like carpet. But I'll have the kids do their names. So like Gracie, Facey, like rhyming ones, and then they think it's the funniest thing. The little things.
So this one is a biggie in kindergarten, is practicing the letter sound correspondence. So once they know that the letters have a sound associated with it, they really have to practice that so that they become, there's 2 things they have to know about. They have to be able to see the letter and say the sound. They have to know A says app. See it and go, oh, app says app. Then they have to know if you say, write app, they have to know that the letter A makes that sound, and that's what they have to write. So it kind of has to go back and forth. So one fun way to practice with them at home is to either have a little tray, you can use a cookie sheet or something, and you can put something in it. Like we use sand at school, but sand can be really messy at home. You can use like dry beans or rice. You could use shaving cream on a tabletop. What else? I mean, just kind of anything that they can make an impression in with their finger. And you can say the sound. You can say, okay, ah, write the letter that says ah, and then have them practice writing it in the sand or the beans or the rice or whatever you're using. And then you're going to want to help them if they can't remember, or if they have it backwards, you're going to say, oh, that's really close, but here's how it looks. And you can show them just to kind of help them practice that relationship. So that's how you can practice saying the sound and writing the letter. But then you also want to show them the letter and have them tell you the sound. So what a fun way that a lot of kids love, because they love to be the teacher, they want to teach their family something, is you can say, oh, I learned that you use motions that go along with each letter sound. Can you teach them to me? And they can say, oh yeah, ah, ah, ah. They say A says ah, B says b. And they can tell you all the emotions that go with the sounds for it. And we have, I can't remember, I think at the end of this presentation, there's a link. We have a slideshow that has videos for each sound of it's me saying the sound and doing the motion. They're just quick little 3-second videos. We have one for every letter of the alphabet. But it's not
Also
in
an
here.
every Friday email that we sent out in our, not, maybe not everyone, but most often with it for, just to look at. In addition to our cyber videos.
I know, there's so much.
There's a lot.
So once the kids know the code, they know the sounds that go with the letters, then they can start really doing the work of reading, like saying the sounds in order to blend them into a word. We say blend. When we say to kids sound out, we're telling them say the sounds and then put the sounds together or blend them to make the sound, the word. So this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. And this is also where we see a huge variance in different kids' abilities in kindergarten. Some kids right now are already able to read these kinds of words, no problem. Other kids are still trying to master the letter sounds. So, there's all these, so I don't know where your children are, but meet them where they're at. If they still don't know all the letter sounds yet, that's really what you want to practice first. Once they know all the sounds, then you can really start trying to do this with them. And we have examples here of 3-letter words, but I would even start with 2-letter words like it, right? And so you could show them. We also do you guys do chop and mop in
Yeah, so
kindergarten?
you might see your kids to, at least in my class, we're always like, mop it up. What's the word?
So you can do that with 2 sounds too, like it. So it's saying the sounds and squishing them together to make the word. Something I discovered this year, I'm working with some 1st grade students right now who are really struggling with this. So it's the 3 sounds. They cannot keep all 3 sounds in their head to put them together. So if we use cat as an example, we would say cat, cat, cat. Because they can keep those 2 chunks in their brain, but they can't keep the 3 chunks. So that's kind of a working memory thing. It may also be developmental. I'm not really sure for them, but so there's different ways you can kind of help them get there. It's kind of a big hump to get over. And once they get over it, then they start flying. But sometimes it takes them a while to get this piece. So when you're reading with them at home, ask questions. Like these are some examples of questions you can ask. Like, why did you choose this book if they were the ones that chose the book? Does this book remind you of anything you've ever seen or read or heard? What kind of characters do you think will be in the book? What do you think is going to happen in the book? You can look at the picture on the front and say, what do you think is going to happen in this book? And have them make a prediction about it. After you read, you can say, what was your favorite part of the book? What was the most interesting thing you learned? Why do you think the author wrote this book? Just like really encourage them to be curious about what they're reading and to really think about it. Sometimes too, you can ask them to make up their own ending to the book. They kind of like to do that sometimes too, be creative. And at the end of the presentation, there's a link that it has a whole bunch more questions than this too, if you wanted to get some other ideas of things to ask. So you as your child's parent, you are their #1 advocate. So if you're concerned about your child and their progress or about anything, you're the person that will speak up for your child and you know your child best. So your job is to speak with their teachers if you have a concern, or even just to have a better understanding of where your child is at. In education, we have a ton of acronyms. So we like to use initials for everything. We work really hard at our school to not do that, but we still do because it's habitual for us. So if someone's talking to you and they say, oh, well, on the BPST, your child scored this. And you're like, what is the BPST? What does that mean? Please ask. We know better, but we slip up. So just ask us. by the way, is that's the basic phonics skills test that we measure phonics on for our children. It's a test our whole school uses. But we use it, we talk about it literally probably every day, so we're very used to saying this. But ask. We usually will be ashamed that we did that, and we will explain to you what we were talking about. If you have concerns, your number one stop is talk to your child's teachers first. Say, hey, I'm worried about this. You know, I'm not sure. Are they out where they're supposed to be? Why isn't my child doing this yet? Or why is my child doing this? Talk to your teacher first. I'm also always available, but the teachers know the kids better usually than I do, unless I'm already seeing a kid in one of my groups, and then I might have a better idea. But in general, your classroom teacher is your first stop. My contact information is in here, and I'm always available for anything. If you have questions about anything at all, either kinder students, if you have older students, younger students, I'm always happy to help out. So you can always reach out to me.
And I'd just like to say too, the English teachers probably know better with your kid. So, I mean, always include the German teacher too, they can have their input, but,
We also are so lucky. A lot of schools don't have a full-time school librarian anymore, but we do, and she's amazing. I think our library is open to parents on Mondays after school. But we also have a really amazing library website where you can check out ebooks and I think you can reserve books. I don't even know everything you can do on the library website, but she has a ton of other resources too. So just know that it's there, it's available. There's a link in here, and she's always happy to help. I know we have books in the library, English, Spanish, and German. So there's multiple options that you have if you are looking for something from our school library. Of course, our community libraries are amazing resources as well. If you need books or programs or anything else, then those are always great resources.
there's also an online website called BookFlix that our school has an account with. And it might be on the library website, but we can make sure we send that out in our Friday email.
Questions?
Take a deep breath.
I know that was a ton of information. My goal is to kind of share all of this information so you can understand what your child is progressing through as they progress through elementary school, and kind of all these different things they have to learn how to do to become a skilled reader. There's a lot. It's a lot more complicated than I realized before I went back to school and learned all this stuff. So, any questions that you have? Monica?
I don't know if this was covered, but when you were talking about the practicing the sounds that go with each letter, what do you recommend if you notice that your student or your child is mispronouncing the sound? Like if they're saying, like instead of saying cute, they say cute, or I'm trying to think of other ones. Like if they're mixing the sounds and they think they're saying it correctly, what would you recommend?
So there's a couple of different ways you can approach that, because you never want to make them feel bad, because we always want our kids to be risk takers and trying things that are new or hard for them. So you might say, oh my gosh, this is what I heard you say. Let's say the sounds together. So you can kind of do it at the same time and then say, oh, did you hear? You said this, but I said this. You hear that? Can you try to say it this way? Right? That is the complicated thing about the sounds too, is especially the vowels, you have to be pretty precise in how you are teaching and practicing those sounds. So there's at the end of this presentation, there is not only the slides where I'm doing the motion along with the sound, but there's a video called the 44 phonemes of English, but there's 44 different sounds in English. And so there you have to say them, especially the vowels, in a pretty precise way. And that video will tell you, here's how this sound sounds. So if you are wondering, like, am I saying this sound right? Because that is kind of important, because if we're teaching them the wrong sound, they're going to get that wrong sound in their brain, and then it's really hard to change that later. So that is something that you want to brush up on if you're not sure, is either watch that video. I think it's about 4 minutes long. It's not super lengthy, but it's a great resource if you want to check, am I saying this sound right? Yeah. And then I would just modeling for your student too, like say, here's how I would say it. Cute. Can you copy me? cute. Okay, yeah. And then sometimes you have to even get really complex with them and say, ooh, your mouth is doing something different than my mouth. Where is your tongue at when you're making that sound? So depending on what it is, you might say, oh, to make the ah sound, look at my mouth, it's a circle. Ah, do you see it's a circle? You need to make your mouth look like a circle too to make that sound. And there's for different sounds, you have to think about where does my tongue go? What are my lips doing? So if they're having a hard time kind of hearing themselves or producing it, you can kind of try and adjust them like that too. You can even get a mirror and say, hey, look at your tongue. Where's your tongue supposed to be? Like sometimes that's helpful to get that. Now there are sounds at this age that they are developmentally not ready to say yet. Like the R sound is really hard for a lot of kids, and that isn't developmentally appropriate, I think, till 7 or 8 sometimes. I think 8. Yeah, 7 or 8. And then like the TH together, that is, I don't even think TH happens in Spanish, right? TH. Yeah, so that's a tough one too for kids that are Spanish speaking children, because then they're trying to learn a sound that haven't maybe had a lot of exposure to too. So then you have to really say, okay, your tongue is right between your teeth, and this is what you're doing, this is what it sounds like. So you have to kind of help them with that part too. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Yo batallo con mi niño que no le gusta la lectura y agarro los libros, pero como yo no hablo inglés, él como que no le interesa mucho. ¿Qué recursos puedo tener ahí para que él empiece a aprender a leer el inglés? ¿Dónde puedo buscar ayuda para darle soporte a él?
Okay, I caught some of that, but can you tell me just so I'm sure?
So, how can she help her student want to read? You know, with her, she doesn't speak a lot of English, but she wants him to read in English. She's asking what kind of support, what can I do to get him to want and to enjoy to read?
So that's tough. What we can do is, I think on Bookflix, does it read aloud?
Yeah, on Bookflix, my instant, which I don't love this answer.
Yo le leo en español en voz alta, pero como él todavía no sabe.
She reads to him in Spanish aloud.
That's what I would recommend to do. I'm more worried that he enjoys reading in any language than he becomes proficient faster in English. I would want him to enjoy having you read to him. And I don't think it matters if it's in English or Spanish right now. We're going to be practicing with him in English at school.
Sí, porque en inglés está un poco atrasado en la letra, los sonidos de las vocales. Todavía no se sabe mucho.
So he doesn't know the sounds very well. Yeah. And that's okay right now too. I mean, that's what we're working on in kindergarten. But you could show him the videos at home. And you could my advice is always to make it a game as much as you can. To make it silly, to make it fun. There's websites. There's a website called starfall.com that he can practice all the sounds on. And I think, do we have an account?
So I was just gonna say, it's not my favorite bit of advice, but it is, and especially if he's still learning English too, the app Starfall that we have, it's free for everyone. There's games they can play. There's videos they can watch, they can read to, and then it just literally is a book that just opens. So it's on a screen, it's not an actual physical book, but it's a really helpful resource. And then my other suggestion is letting your teacher know so that when she goes to the library with your student, he can tell her is he interested in Super Mario or Pokemon or plants, like little things like that. And then she can team up with the librarian to find some picture books that are exciting for him, as opposed to sometimes our class libraries aren't even filled with stuff he might like. So I would utilize the librarian. I would make sure your teacher knows, and we can find the things that he's interested in, because there is a book for everything. So just to maybe try something, for you.
Tiene intereses, pero agarra libros muy avanzados para él, que tienen muchas letras de de superhéroes, como le gusta el Sonic, agarra libros con mucha letra, pero no le digo, te voy a inventar el libro.
So the Sonic books are too hard. that he
Yeah,
likes,
he
yeah.
picks books that, and that's right, but that he chooses books that are way too hard.
So,
Mhm.
and that might happen, you guys might notice that too, at the library time, they pick these crazy chapter books, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
it's just words. But we have so much more, and so your student's teacher just needs to be a little bit more clued in, because I've had parents email me saying, do not send my kid home with another chapter book.
Yeah.
And I get it, because it's like, what am I doing? And now I have 10 chapter books with a really cute pony on the front,
Yes.
but they can't read it.
Yeah.
So if you can just make up, because we have 24 kiddos, so library time can be kind of nuts. But my biggest suggestion is just telling your student's teacher and making sure the library is involved. So because there are other Sonic books that are picture and with like 3 little words. They're called, my favorite books, they're called I Can Read books. I have a few over here. Bob books are great. There are lots of little smaller books that he can read. And I have to say, once your student can identify like the sight word A or I or whatever, like the littlest things, and they read it to you, I guarantee you he will want to read more, or she will want to read more. You said it. So he will, once he builds that confidence, it will help. And I encourage the 2 of you and anyone who's watching to just build them up when they say something correct, because that's the only way that it will help them feel successful in reading.
Is he learning to read in Spanish also?
Yo le leo en español.
Yeah.
Y
So,
en inglés le leo, pero no es correcto.
yeah, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Because remember what I said earlier, the skills that he learns, if he's learning to read in Spanish, those skills will transfer over to English too. So if he's learning to read in Spanish, keep doing that with him, because that actually will help him more than anything else, because the skills will transfer to the English. If he's learning the Spanish sounds that go with the letters, some of, they're different, some of them are different than English, but that just making those connections in his brain will help him become better at the English sounds as well. So that's another thing that you could work on at home, is really just focusing on the reading in Spanish. Just knowing it will help him here too in English. So, and that's a great thing to do. I mean, then he would be triliterate, English, German, and Spanish. I mean, that's amazing, right? Any other questions? Did that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I hold your baby?
Anybody else have any questions? Anything we can help with? Did I overwhelm you with information? Well, we're really grateful that you guys came tonight. I hope it was helpful. We're always here. If you have more questions, you can always email me, email your children's teachers. We're here to support you guys, your families, and your children. That's why we're here. So please utilize us if you need anything. Thank you again for coming. There's still lots of pizza. If you're hungry,
Want to take that?
please eat
Yeah.
pizza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Taste to the
Andrew Morales.
Andrew.